Hi, my name is Fabian, also known as LiveOverflow. I'm very passionate about bringing security education to the masses through my YouTube channel, and I'm also the co-founder of Hextree, an online training platform to teach cybersecurity skills. And in today's conversation, I'm joined by Kristoffer from Google. He's a security engineer and also responsible for mobile VRP, so basically the bug bounty program that covers Android applications from Google. From him, we can learn the process of a vulnerability that gets reported to Google in an Android application, what happens behind the scenes, and talk with him about the challenges around educating people on Android security. Google has actually sponsored us to create Android security courses because we feel like there is a lack of resources to teach this from zero to be able to find bugs in real-life applications. So let's talk to Kristoffer to learn all about this. Hey everybody, I'm sitting here with Kristoffer from Google Mobile VRP, and I want to learn a little bit more about your experience and what you do at Google. So tell me a little bit, what is your role at Google and the experience you have, especially with mobile VRP?
Yeah, so my role mainly when it comes to VRP, I do other things as well. So I work in something called ISE, or Information Security Engineering. In regards to mobile VRP, what I do is I partially lead the panel and also do mostly the panel meetings and so on. So that's, we decide, we don't triage the bugs. It's post-triage, we start looking at how to pay out, we verify some of the bugs sometimes and so on.
You just mentioned panel. I think you are very much locked into the Google words. Like what does it mean you are working on the panel?
All right, so maybe I should explain a little bit how the structure works. So essentially when you report a bug, from your end you send it off and then it comes into triaging essentially. So a security engineer will take a look at it, kind of assess it initially and see like, okay, how is this, and then after that, if it's a valid bug, they will file it, and then you get this like good job, little email, and it will get sent to a panel. So depending on which VRP it is, so if it's mobile VRP or the Android VRP or Chrome or just Google VRP in general, it will get sent to a specific panel. And the panel is made up of people or security engineers who specialize in that field, and then they will take a look at it and decide, what the payout should be, essentially.
So when a report is coming in, how many people are involved on the Google side? Is there like one person that immediately rejects and filters out before it goes to the panel, and then how many people are in the panel? Like how many people look at this report that's coming in?
So it really depends a lot. I think it can vary a lot, but in the end, there's probably going to be several people. Like it's never just one. So initially maybe one person will triage the bug and then send it off to the panel, and the panels vary in size. So, but I think the average of panel meeting would be like 4 or 5 people at least for a panel meeting.
And when you receive a report, like what differentiates like an easy report for you to try, something that just goes through quickly, and what is more challenging?
So I think what makes it easier for us is if you very clearly state what you think the bug is. So in your own words, where you found the code, and very clearly, properly show it. But the most important thing is a proof of concept. And also really make sure that you've read the rules before, and so that you actually send in something that's valid and that reproduces on the latest version of Android and so on. So a proof of concept, maybe a video, a lot of the time it actually does help. A really good explanation of what you think the bug actually is in your own words.
So when you receive a bug report that is lacking some kind of information, where in that pipeline of the triaging does it get like stuck? Where does it bounce back again with questions to the bug hunter? Has it made its way to the panel already? Like, did you talk about it? Or essentially what happens if like a report is not very clear to you? What does this cause and trigger?
So this can happen at any point, really. So mainly, I think it's at the triage stage where they kind of filter out invalid reports. A lot of the time, if the person triaging cannot reproduce the bug, then they will talk to the researcher and be like, okay, I can't reproduce this or whatever. And if they're unable to verify it and still decide to file it to us, then in the panel, then we will have to, if they feel like there's more knowledge needed from the security engineers that specify in that field, then we might send it back as well. But it can get stuck at several points. I don't think it ever really gets stuck. but it can be sent back. And also sometimes if we reject a bug, we feel like, oh, this is not, we can't reproduce this, we don't see the vulnerability here, then people appeal the decision. And then sometimes we can also, re-triage and re-look at it. We always look if you appeal. So.
You recently also created a blog post about increased rewards. I believe it was up to 10x reward or something. And also there's one number that was, at least from the outside, very curious to me. I believe it was like you received 40 submissions last year or something. So to be honest, that does sound like a small number. And looking at like the bug bounty community in general on Twitter, it seems like a huge community, and you see about bug reports all the time. So how come there are only like 40 submissions for like mobile VRP?
Yeah, I think there's really not that many people that do Android research. And I think it's that simple. In comparison to the other VRPs, there's much fewer reporters and much fewer people doing research on it. And it's really that simple. And also the panel, or like the program, is not that old. It's only a year old. So that's one thing. We just turned one. But apart from that, it's just not that many people doing it. It's a very small community.
You mentioned already that a proof of concept is very important to get the report triaged well, and that you are even able to understand it. What does even a POC mean? What is a proof of concept in an Android app?
It can really depend. So we try to go through it on the rewards page or for the mobile VRP, but it really depends. Whatever you can show us that in the easiest way can demonstrate the bug. So it can be an APK, an app that you've created. And if you do, don't send us just the APK, send us the source so that we can recreate it, because we're hesitant to run people's random APKs they sent us. But if we have to, we have to. But then it takes more time, and then you have to wait for longer if we have to take extra steps to be careful with what we receive. The easiest actually is just if you can trigger an intent from ADB, for example. That's the easiest. Sometimes it's just a one-liner we can just put in the terminal and try something, and if it works, then that's the easiest, fastest, and we can just pay you immediately. But if we have to go through a lot of steps to try to reproduce it, then it will take more time. I
see personally two large challenges in Android bug hunting, and that is, what is the threat model? Like, even what can like a malicious app do, or what do you consider valid? Because I could imagine some cases where there's a certain ADB command maybe that, or can every app what you can do with ADB, every app can do, or is that not
It depends.
true?
You can do a lot of stuff with ADB that you could not do. You wouldn't be able to do, that any app would be able to do. So it really depends. You have to be careful what you send.
Yeah. Also, creating a proof of concept application, writing code can be a barrier of entry. Exactly. With web hacking, you can often just use VRP or some other scanning tools. And there also exist scanning tools for Android that report something. But sometimes the tools make mistakes, so it's best to obviously be able to reproduce it and write some code. And I guess that is like a huge challenge, being able to write code.
It's a requirement as well. If you just send us a scan report or a result from a scan report, it's doubtful that will get through, to be honest. Unless it's really clear, but then you should be able to take the results from the report, make sure that it's actually valid, and then report that result, like the finding. And then that's a valid finding. But if you just send us a report, like that's it, then that's not going to get through.
Now, in terms of scope, okay, maybe there are only 40 reports because there are a few apps and they are very secure or so. Is it maybe also there are not that many targets, or how do the targets look like in Google VRP?
Very many targets. There's no lack of targets. Like, if people actually look, then there's a lot to look. The scope is huge for Google.
And I believe there are like two different kind of targets. You have the Google main applications and you have tiers.
Right, so we have, it really depends. So we both pay for first-party apps, which is mobile VRP. What we do is we tier apps into 3 tiers. Tier 1 is a very specific list of apps, which are our crown jewels, so to say. Tier 2 apps are everything else that interact with Tier 1 apps, that have some kind of permission and can talk to the Tier 1 apps. So that will be like a kind of increases the attack vector for Tier 1, or the attack surface. And Tier 3 apps are just everything else. But you would be surprised how much actually goes into Tier 2. If, for example, the calculator is a Tier 2 app, even though you think it doesn't have any important access to anything because it's just a calculator, but in fact it does have some permissions and some access that it needs. So the attack surface is actually huge for tier 2 apps.
Yeah, and besides this, there's also the Android open source project. Like you have some kind of like default apps that other vendors can build upon. I guess that's also an interesting target, because if you find issues with these base apps, then it could possibly spread to other vendors implementing Android.
Absolutely, and those will most likely fall under Android VRP, because those are part of the Android kind of ecosystem. Most likely they will fall under there. But we also paid for those, of course.
To be honest, it sounds so confusing. I feel like there was an Android bug bounty forever, like, and you say it only exists a year. Was it under a different like brand, or did you triage it under a different group or so? Or did you just literally not accept Android bugs before?
No, so basically the way it has been is that if it's specifically an AOSP or Android related, like in the platform, then it goes to Android VRP. Yeah. And then there's also some other examples of if it's in Chrome, it goes to Chrome. Even if it's a Chrome app, it goes to Chrome. Now, when it comes to first-party applications, it always went to Google VRP, and it was triaged by Google VRP under the Google VRP rules. But they are not really suited to handle Android applications. Like the rules are not really, you can't really follow them. Like the rewards table and everything doesn't really reflect properly into Android applications. So that's why we started mobile VRP, so we can properly handle, Android application bugs.
I know you only got like 40 reports, but is there even a pattern there? Like, what are the typical kind of issues that maybe can be found in apps?
Absolutely. So I think there's a huge amount of vulnerabilities related to intent redirection. That's a big issue, I think, in general. Then also just authentication issues or like authorization issues where like you can permission bypasses. That's quite common actually.
So like Android permissions.
Exactly. Yeah. So that's quite common. That's what I think is. I would probably say that permission related issues are among the top ones, most common ones.
Yeah. I also found the permission system, it's not difficult, but you have to learn it. It's different from like basic Linux that you are maybe used to in terms of permission system. It's just its own thing. So there's a little barrier of entry that you have to overcome until you understand, oh, that's how Android does it. And once you do that, then it makes sense like what kind of issues can appear. But yeah, that's a challenge to learn.
But there's a lot of just unexpected side consequences of how this permission system is built. And I think permission squatting or orphan permissions, where you expect something to exist on the phone, but it doesn't. And then something else can claim that permission and so on. These are like some kind of corner cases that can create very serious bugs. And together with other vulnerability types, you can actually get some pretty serious issues.
Now, in terms of attack surface, something that I found a little bit difficult to understand, like what is a realistic attack? For example, there are certain permissions or certain abilities that an app in the Play Store cannot take because you wouldn't put them on the Play Store or only in special exceptions, but people could sideload these apps or from alternative app stores. So when you triage bugs or vulnerabilities, is this something people should consider? Like, can I basically install an app from Android Studio and whatever this app can do, it's probably a valid bug, or are there other restrictions?
So there's one thing here that's sideloading, and sideloading is something that we will still consider a vulnerability that requires you to sideload. We will still consider a vulnerability potentially. Depends on the whole picture, of course, but we might consider it. And we have in the past considered vulnerabilities, but we do see it as lower impact because it requires a lot more user interaction. So we already feel like it's already mitigated to some point if you require someone to sideload the application. So that can affect the payout, which is, I think, quite important to mention. But of course, it can be a valid bug. So there are apps on the phone, which are Google apps, or they may be pre-installed and so on, which are allowing you to access some components if you have certain permissions. And those permissions are only owned or actually can only be owned by specific apps or package names. And if that is not installed, then you can install let's say, a third-party app or sideload something that we would never allow it to be on the Play Store. Let's say you're required to have Gmail. You don't have Gmail installed and you sideload a fake version of Gmail, then the operating system will think that that actually is Gmail, and then it will have access to a lot of things on the phone. So if you kind of drop a fake app in the place of a legit one, it can do some damage based on the package name and so on.
I guess the lowest severity or impact is like sideloading an app, because when you sideload, you could even use a package name like Gmail. You could kind of like...
If it's not already there.
Yeah, if it's not already there, exactly. So if you find a bug that requires this kind of power, basically be able to choose things, then that's the lowest severity. And then I guess a little bit higher up are apps that could theoretically be in the Play Store, because they don't need, for example, to use a already existing package name or so.
Yeah, it depends, right? So yeah, there's a lot of mitigations here and so on, and we don't allow just any type of package name. Some are reserved and so on, but yeah.
And then, of course, there are also vulnerabilities that don't require an application at all. For example, they could be triggered from a web view or browser. And then I guess there are also vulnerabilities that are like fully remote. Like, can you talk a little bit more about these tiers, severities, impacts from?
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, obviously, the more remote and the less interaction from the user you require, the higher severity it is and higher impact, and also the payout reflects that a lot. We mostly get vulnerabilities and reports regarding installed apps. So you have to install a malicious app and they can do something on the device. That's the most common, I would say. Then, of course, you have if you have to follow a link, that's the next most common. And then full remote. So far, we haven't seen one. At least I haven't. But apart from that, the follow link, where you have to press some, let's say, trigger a deep link or something, and that is able to exploit something on the phone or do something on the phone that you're not supposed to.
For some apps, the line can be quite blurry of what is the application, and a lot of apps have a server involved. So a lot of bug hunters, I think, are also looking at Android just to reverse engineer and find some server APIs. Can you talk a little bit more about this? The barrier between what is mobile and then what is web, because I'm not sure, are you paying for third-party vulnerabilities in the APIs of these apps? Like, there's a huge app with millions of downloads, and somebody starts looking into it, but doesn't necessarily find, or potentially a bug that is just like the Android app, but finds like an API issue of this app. Is that still covered under policy?
Yeah, but the thing is, with these like kind of chains of bugs and everything, it can get quite messy. Like, where is the vulnerability actually? And so we've had several cases where it was not that easy to decide, and we had to go back and forth with the researcher and kind of figure it out to see, like, is this a valid bug or not? It can get quite messy. Like, it's not black and white. Do you also get a lot of invalid reports or some invalid reports? What are some typical invalid reports or misconceptions, I guess, that lead to these invalid reports? So I think, since I'm in the panel, I don't see that much of it. We do get some where people feel like the impact is higher maybe than it is. I can understand in some cases, and it's quite subjective after all, but then that's why we have our rules and we really follow them and we always play devil's advocate. Yeah, the invalid ones usually get bounced already at triage, I think, and then the ones who still get to us because it's still technically something, but it's unclear how high the impact is mostly if the impact is quite low, or it requires too much user interaction. It's just too much. It's not realistic that this would actually be a vulnerability. So the impact is just so low that those are the ones that maybe would not make it.
And that's what the panel is for, where multiple people then...
Exactly. So we discuss, and it happens a lot that we may spend 1 hour discussing one bug, just because we cannot, we play devil's advocate. We're like, yeah, but I really think that if you kind of look at it from this perspective, then it is. We really try to side with the researcher always. That's the rule we have, always side with the researcher.
Yeah. From the web-related VRPs, I have heard that issues got even higher impact sometimes because Google understands an impact of something, like if it's an XSS on a certain domain, you already know very well the impact it could lead to, but the bug hunter maybe doesn't have the experience or so, and then you increase the impact for that because you know it. Has this happened on Android as well? Like, are you well aware of, like, if you find an intent redirect in a certain app that it could achieve high things, or are the bug hunters so well experienced in that area because there are only so few as a niche that they already know like what can be done with it?
I feel like the bug hunters are quite well aware of the impact, and I think the rules also reflect that quite well. So they understand what their payout is going to be. But it has happened where we feel like, oh, this is maybe higher, or a lot of the time I think if we see a situation like this where we're like, this has potential to be more, then we will encourage, we will come back. We won't make a decision yet. We'll be like, oh, okay, have you looked at it from this perspective? And try to encourage them to try to find what we know is there potentially, and we point them in the right direction. Like, try looking at it this way. Can you show more impact? Can you demonstrate more? Can you make a different POC? Have you tried doing this? Because we pay for demonstrated impact, we don't pay for potential impact, and to try to push them to get more impact and paid more, essentially. And if we know, like this, like you mentioned, like behind the scenes, we are aware that the impact is higher already, then we will pay for the higher impact, of course.
You did mention that because you are more working with the panel, you don't see that many of the reports that are initially coming in, but do you still know a little bit about the very invalid or the typical invalid reports that people...
I think there's a lot has to do with potentially if they haven't read the rules correctly and they immediately report something that's just wrong, stuff that doesn't reproduce at all, spam, and just sending in scan reports. You ran a scan, you get 3,700 results and 3,699 of them are false positives, and you expect us to go through it. That's not going to happen, unfortunately. We don't have the time for that. So it's just that kind of stuff. I think if you have a good report, it will not get filtered away. It's just more filtering away the noise that's clearly not real, or people trying to game the system, or send in AI-generated reports and stuff to just try to fool us into paying them money. Because there's a lot of that, unfortunately.
Sometimes I see reports where people start defining a certain vulnerability and describe the vulnerability. You are all security engineers. You know what vulnerabilities are. You don't need a new definition of what is an intent, for example, or so. Would you say the most important thing is if it's just a clear proof of concept, that's basically all you need with maybe a little bit of text? Is that?
I think it's, imagine if you're sitting there and you get this report and you're looking at it for the first time, you have no idea what it's about at all, and you get some source code and that's it. Yes, that would probably work. I can look at your code and I can figure out what you're trying to do and what the potential here is. And that will just take more time. It will take 30, 40, maybe an hour sometimes. If it's really complex, I will maybe take more time. If you just write, this code does this, and then I can verify that it does exactly that, then that just saved us 1 hour of work, and yeah, you get paid faster. So I think just be clear what you think that this does, so we can verify if it actually does what you're saying it does. That's really all that we need. We don't need you don't have to define all of this. Unless you find a new vulnerability type bug class, then I would love to see that. But then we have a different situation. Also
for us, it was really great working with you, because for us, it was not just creating a course. We were able to get some really cool insight into the receiving side, receiving these bug reports. And you were also able to connect us to bug hunters to get some really in-depth knowledge about this stuff. So yeah, we hope we created some courses for you that really get you started with Android bug hunting. So thanks again for chatting with me about this topic, and hope to see you on the Android continent.